Hello, my name is Lev Nelik, and this recording, relatively brief, in preparation to our upcoming meeting on Tuesday. That will be on Tuesday, February 7th at our usual time, 8 o'clock in the evening Israeli time, 1 o'clock in the afternoon American Eastern Standard Time. And the topic we wanted to discuss, and this in preparation to that, is different form of governments of different countries, different places in the world. Theocracy, democracy, hypocrisy, republic, whatever you want to do it. So I put together a little chart, kind of to think about it. And I have to say, I don't know exactly how it is. This is just a first draft. But David helped me. We had a coffee yesterday, and he gave me a lot of education on the current structure of the Israeli government, of the American government to compare, and also ancient Israeli society, how it functions. David knows a lot about it, but if I don't write it down and don't kind of summarize it my way, I don't the way I understand it, I have troubles understanding it. So this is just to bounce it off you guys, ladies and gentlemen. And after our session on Tuesday, we probably will correct it, because I'm sure I made a lot of mistakes. But this is just a draft the way you would look at it. So let me share the screen and grab the chart for you. Let's see, where's my chart? Here it is. Okay, so it looks like very busy, but let's go through that. We have a 4 quadrants here. On the top left quadrant, that's ancient Israel, theocracy. On the right side, this is present-day Israel, democracy. On the lower left, this is the United States, republic. And then on the lower right, the A, B, C, D, that I try to draw equivalency, if I can use this term, or somewhat attempts to make some equivalency, how the highest echelon of what constitutes a starting point filters down to the people. So the A is in quotes, guidance level. B is like action level. C is a court, which is a checkpoints level to make sure things are according to the high level implemented down the line. And D is people. So if you look at ancient Israel, the way I understand it, Israel acknowledges God. Here's God. And God gives us a Torah. And based on the Torah, flushes out halacha. The Knesset Gadola of men of great assembly, 120 people, scribes, sages, prophets. After at the beginning of the Second Temple, when they returned from Babylon with Ezra and Nehemiah, they created this Knesset Gadola, and which maybe not created halacha. That could be a dispute, I guess, but at least formed the halacha. Even before that, halacha kind of existed. I mean, Jews knew how to behave after coming from Egypt to Canaan, to Israel. And whether people believe the halacha already existed and just basically was finalized and documented by members of Knesset, of Great Assembly, or some people say they just created it at that time. But in either case, halacha became a practical set of rules. So in the magenta or red, I guess, color here, magenta, I guess, we show the A, the highest element, essentially halacha, which is coming on from a Torah, which is coming connected to God. So once the members of Great Assembly did their job, essentially after several hundred years, it stopped functioning, but halacha remained. And the governing body, day-to-day activity, so to speak, of ancient Israel was between two bodies: the king and his ministers, like departments, if you will. The king had a department of war, department of agriculture, department of motorcycles, department of cars, whatever king had. King and his court, that's B, the action level. King had a lot of powers, not unlimited power. There are certain things king could not do, not a lot. Mostly he can do almost everything he wanted to. But the C, the court right here, called Beis Din or Sanhedrin, with 71 members, with a Nasi, the president of the court, and the Avdin. This, for example, Hillel was the first, if I'm not mistaken, Nasi, and Shammai as the Avdin, let's say the president and vice president of Sanhedrin, if you will. And then there was underneath of them the lower dins, lower courts, 23 members, then 3 members. So between actions, like if you want to make a bridge, or if you want to put a bridge across the river, you have to discuss it with local authorities. So under the king, with the local offices, you can go and figure out how to make the bridge. Executive power, if you will. Was a little stretch of imagination to understand that. And the Beis Din was in continuous communications with halacha, and they all religious men, or very knowledgeable men, and there was no disconnect between them and halacha and the Torah and God. There was direct line. Same thing, the line was between king. I should probably show also double arrow here. King also was religious man, and he was guided by halacha, by Torah. And whenever there was some deviation from these rules, we had trouble. Every so often, the king could usurp the power. And in the history of ancient Israel, many times, kings, especially in northern Israel, and eventually Judean kingdom and south, was affected as well. Troubles happened, and 12 tribes were exiled to Assyria, and then later on, 150 years, south was exiled to Babylon. So basically, yes, it's possible for a king or even Beis Din members to sort of like disconnect themselves from the halacha and Torah and God, and there's a consequences for that. But generally, that was a structure that functions mostly in that fashion. And the people were guided, essentially. They were subject to the king, and they were guided by, if they have an issue with a law, with a court, they go to lower dins. They could elevate it to the higher Sanhedrin. And then they Masechta the Sanhedrin and Talmud. You can read all these details. But this is a structure of the ancient Israel. God is pretty much in the picture, and everybody, including the king and the people and Beis Din. I should probably put the line here between people and God directly. People and Torah, there was always a connection. Sometimes to a stronger way, sometimes to a lesser way, but the connection always existed. So the spirit of God, the Torah Halakha, permeated entire society. And even though there was individual differences and deviations every so often, fundamentally that was existing in society as far as I understand it. In the present today's Israel, God, Torah, and Halakha exist. There is a direct connected line, the dash line, called voluntarily line to people. And a lot of Israeli society are religious, some not religious, a significant proportion non-religious. Some would argue that perhaps 2/3 of Israeli are not religious, Helanim, and maybe 1/3 religious, observant, if you will. But in reality, you can find that even non-religious people walking to the supermarket reach out and touch a mezuzah. They still have a bar mitzvahs. They do weddings. They know when Pesach is. So you cannot say that the religious society is mostly non-religious. It's a very difficult concept to describe in this presentation, but I would just limit it at that connection exists between most of the people and God. Even the person who on Shabbat goes to the beach instead of the synagogue still has a respect for the Torah, and the person knows, he or she, that the uniqueness about our society, Israeli society, that we do have Torah. And that's probably makes us unique whole world. Torah. Other nations, other people have other things, Bible, Quran, other holy books, if you will. But for us, we certainly have Torah, and it permeates entire Israeli society. However, the guiding halacha, equivalent to halacha, the element A here, is essentially a declaration of independence. Declaration of independence in 1948 was done by the men of great assembly of modern Israel, Ben-Gurion, Golda Meir, and others. In that group, there were also religious people. Most of them were, not all, religious people as well. Ben-Gurion was a religious man, despite the fact that many times the perception is that he was against religion. that's also a difficult topic. If you go to a museum of Ben Gurion in the south of Beersheba, you'll see in a house that kibbutz that Ben Gurion retired, the tables are filled with Talmud, with a Torah, with encyclopedia. So he was a very educated man, but normally he's known to the world as not a religious guy. Traditionally, it was not religious government overall, and many times the extremes of Israeli society are highly religious, like, let's say, people living in Mea Shearim find that Zionists problematic for Israel, if you will. Then and opinions vary. Some people say no, they're not problematic. Thank God for them. They created modern Israel, and opinions range as typical Israel, typical Jewish opinions, anywhere in between. But be as it may, Declaration of Independence has essentially, from that come fundamental laws of a human behavior. What can we do, what we can't do? There are fundamental laws, several laws. They're written down. We know what they are. But they come out from Declaration of Independence. Then below that, equivalent to B, to the king in ancient Israel, we don't have a king, but we have an action level, a Knesset. Knesset gets elected directly by the people. So I put here this line. These people elected actually, the arrow shows on the president, but actually goes elected Knesset. And what Knesset, the parliament with 120 members formed, presently chair Amir Hanna, that Knesset is in session and becomes a horse trading to create a government. We all know Israeli politics. So government, Mislala, with Netanyahu currently a prime minister, that's a governing body. And then there's also a president in a dashed line, which mostly a formality. President has its function, but a weak function, if you will. So basically, between Knesset and government becomes a governing body of Israeli life. That's kind of B, action level, if you will, for lack of a better term. And then there is a Supreme Court with Esther Hagut, presently, if I pronounce correctly, with, I think, 15 judges, although I'm not sure, it might be more, and the lower courts. So if people have issues in Beersheba, in Haifa, and Eilat, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, they go to lower courts. They can elevate it to the Supreme Courts, and that is how to resolve the issue, just like people were resolving the issues with the courts, and even to Beis Din in ancient Israel. That's similar. Then, if people have any operational things, should we build a road, park, whatnot, they interact with the government, with the local government, which ultimately flushes up toward the government in Jerusalem, in the capital of Israel. And so you can see the king and his ministers kind of equivalent, quote unquote, to a Knesset and government. And the court, Beis Din in ancient Israel, similar to Supreme Court today. But the big difference, though, officially, there's no connection. I crossed it, X'd out. God, Torah, and Halacha does not have direct connections to Declaration of Independence. It doesn't have direct connections to the court. Nazis, Avdin, and all the members of the Sanhedrin, very close connection. I mean, they studied all day long Torah and Halacha. They actually did the studying of that. They knew that's what their life. In the Supreme Court of Israel currently, it's mostly probably more liberal, for the lack of a better term, although there are some religious members there as well, but fundamentally there's no direct connection. They're not looking at Halacha and Torah to tell them what to do. Maybe some people, by their internal conscience, are affected by that, but it's a personal choice, not the structural governmental agency. So there's no connection between God, Torah, and Halacha. The Halacha of ancient Israel would be essentially a fundamental loss of declaration independence. That's what guides the upper level of the country currently, and the democracy. That's why it's not theocracy, but democracy. And that's basically how they function, how the Israeli society functions. Now, the problem, just like in the ancient Israel, if the king and the members of the Din would deviate from the Torah and Halacha, problems will happen. But in reality, the Sanhedrin really didn't deviate very much, although there are occasional slip-ups, but basic connection very strong, and temporarily waves, peaks and valleys would smooth out. The connection will be essentially, will never be severed from God. maybe becomes weaker sometimes, but really didn't happen, didn't disappear. But in modern Israel, depending what people do, because people now elect these bodies, not here God sets it up, people that follow the rules established by the king of Beis Din. But in a modern society, it's opposite. People develop select the Knesset. So the Knesset and Supreme Court, essentially guided by the non-religious documents, so if people happen to be very liberal in certain times, then the government will tend to be very liberal and they want nothing to do with Torah. If some other time people have to be very conservative, very religious, for lack of better terms, then the Knesset government and the court will become very religious. Currently in Israel, as you know, Knesset is kind of somewhat in between. The latest Knesset tend to be a little bit more to the right politically. Religiously, it's a mix. There are religious people in the Knesset and there are non-religious people. In Supreme Court, most of the people are non-religious. There are some religious, and the fundamental expression of the justice, when they check with the fundamental laws, they interpret the fundamental laws the way Declaration of Independence, Ben-Gurion, and the Golda Meir and others set it up, essentially in a non-religious but democratic civil way. Now, the current problem, as you know today, we know it's actually misunderstood that as if more conservative government today wants to, especially the extreme faction of the government, wants to change things, to take the power of the court away. It's not exactly that, because you need to have a Supreme Court. You need a checks and balances. What they want to do is, I believe in 1977, the top justice, Chief Justice of Supreme Court, introduced the law, a fundamental law that didn't exist before, didn't come from Declaration of Independence, by which the certain civil liberty, I don't remember these two fundamental laws were added, but basically civil, acknowledging the right to civil liberties, which open up Pandora box to all sorts of interpretations. So if you have some demonstration of inappropriate behavior, you don't have to join that, but you couldn't say anything against it. So it started to become very controversial issues. So the Supreme Court did not have approval of the Knesset to create this additional fundamental laws, and Knesset actually is not supposed to do it. Knesset can make the laws, which is kind of local, not fundamental, but I mean, the law today for certain things that maybe didn't have a need for that 10 years ago, it's one thing, but nothing fundamentally changed the structure of Israeli society. So that's a controversy today. So because there is no direct connection between God, Torah, Halacha with the governing bodies, there's always the danger, Yohan might say, what happens, Israel eventually will lose its Jewish and religious identity altogether. Let's say society will become completely non-religious, non-observant. Well, then there will be no Shabbat, there will be no Pesach, it all will disappear, theoretically, because there's no connection between the governments and God. But in practice, in my view, it will never disappear, because the connection between God, Torah, Halacha, and people always exists directly, always existed before and exists today. So no matter what happens within Knesset, government, and Supreme Court, overall, it's not easy to wipe out the religious feeling, how people feel about God. And if every so often, and actually today, society in Israel, in my view, more religious, more observant, if you will, than it was in 1948 and 1950. Not a lot more, but more. The tendency generally now to become more observant. And of course, you have to have a check and balances. You can't do things too quickly because you have to respect the rights and views of people who might not feel the way I feel or some other people might feel. So that's a political struggle in Israel right now, which is the struggle between Supreme Court affected by the current Knesset, by the more liberal court, pushed by the more right, more conservative faction within the Knesset to become more conservative and to interpret Declaration of Independence and fundamental laws without lose liberal interpretation from the standpoint of the conservative members of the Knesset. That's the struggle going on in Israel right now. So society is kind of polarized into people who feel that No, we have to stay with a God, Torah, and Halacha, and at least from Declaration of Independence, not to modify at least that. And people who say, no, all bets are off, we can modify, we can use our subjective feeling. That's not right. We have to do this. In my view, it becomes, in my view, in your view, in his view, in her view, it becomes a debate which is very difficult to reconcile and bring to common denominator, because there is no absolute common denominator. God is separated from official government body. It was not separated in the past. That's the current crisis in Israel, if you will, or debate. Just for interest, here's American way of system. In America, God and the Bible exist, and people, to some extent, follow. Many observant people. The founding father of the United States created a constitution based on the Bible. Thomas Jefferson, Quincy Adams, all these people, they're very highly religious people, create a constitution. So Constitution in America is in a magenta box, which is equivalent to the Halacha or the Declaration of Independence, if you will. That's the A. But now, connection between Constitution and Torah, not Torah, in America, it's a Bible, becomes weakened and almost non-existent. Theoretically, it came from the Bible, but now, as initial America, the Mayflower pilgrims, when they came, there was mostly Christian religious people who created the Constitution in a way that ancient Israel was understanding their Torah and Halacha. But as America grew, as people came to America, not only Christians, but from China, from Russia, from England, from New Zealand, from Sweden, from Portugal, from India, from Ceylon, from Africa, that mixture of people no longer was monolithic nation, tribal nation, like the Jews are, because not only religious, but ethnically, that society homogeneous in ancient Israel and in present-day Israel, even though there are minorities in Israel, non-Jewish minorities as well. But basically, it's a Jewish state today in Israel and Jewish state in the past. For 3,500 years, it was a Jewish state, even with occasional slip-ups that we have, but both basically we maintain that continuity. In America, as now 300 million people makes the melting pot, it's not really a melting pot because it didn't melt to a common upper authorities. People who are from Indian descent perhaps go by Krishna. People from China will maybe go by Confucius. I'm not sure. The Christian go by the Christian doctrine, and minority of Jews go by the Torah. Even among the Jews, not everybody goes by Torah. So there is no absolute one thing like Jews had for the Torah, even the Bible. And because of that, the connection now is almost severed, and therefore it's similar to what it is now in a present Israel democracy. I call this U.S. republic, but it's similar to democracy. Under the B, the action level, it's a Congress, the government, with Senate and the House of Representatives, and the president, and that basically the body, upper ones, and then lower state entities that basically run day-to-day activities. And that body is elected by the people, just like in Israel today, people elect the body, the Knesset. So in America, people elect the body, the Congress, and the president. There is Supreme Court with 9 judges, and then a bunch of lower courts with whom people interact. So people interact with the government, with a B, with a king, and people interact with the Supreme Court, with a Sanhedrin, with the deans. So that interaction very similar democratically as it is in modern Israel. But now the difference, again, one more time, I would say, in Israel, the connection with God directly didn't sever with the same God for everybody. In Israel, we don't have half people believe in Torah and other half on the Krishna of India or Zlatoustra or whatever. It's all, whether you believe in Torah or you don't believe in Torah, but it is Torah. In America, who knows what upper? There's no upper authority, absolute authority. It's all relative. I think we should do this, and I think he should do that. I think this is morally right, and that person thinks it's morally wrong. So it becomes debate by who is right. Very difficult to find out who is right. If you have 10 people in America and they're all discussing politics, everybody has different opinion. Israelis also have different opinions politically. But at least one thing unites Israelis is they know if we talk about God, we know which one we're talking about. If we talk about halacha, I can agree or not agree with halacha, but I know what halacha is. In America, if I came from India, what's a halacha? So if I came from Russia, what is halacha? So this is a difference between three forms of basically two forms of government: democracy, today Israel and U.S. And U.S. probably similar thing you can say about Germany and France, Spain, with some variations. Of course, another form of government, which is the tyrannical government, like in ancient feudal system, there was a king, and there's no religion; it's just savagery, basically. That I didn't put it in the chart because nowadays it's probably no longer really exists. Although you probably might find it somewhere, maybe in Central Africa, you can have tribal society that live by traditions and maybe by religious mythical beliefs and something. To them that probably will be similar, equivalent what we would call the entity for us, God, and the laws of God, Torah and Halacha. So that's a topic I think you might find it of interest, and we will talk about it more. You'll correct me where I missed something or misstated something or misrepresented. In the meantime, I look forward to see you on Tuesday, the 7th of February. This is our sign-up things on Zoom, 325-804-5811, with the password 285775. Here, keep it on the screen for a minute. So I hope you find it interesting. I will just stop sharing the screen. Comes back to me. In the meantime, today is Thursday. One more day, Shabbat Shalom. Whether you're observant or not observant, I still want to wish you a good Shabbat Shalom. Stay healthy. It's kind of cold today, cold week, so dress warm, enjoy it, and see you soon. All the best. Shabbat Shalom.